Welcome to This Story Needs to Be Heard with Lance Gunkel and Adam Steen. This Story Needs to Be Heard is a collection of stories from unsung heroes who are living a life of impact in Iowa and across the nation. This series is brought to you by Syverson Strege, a financial planning firm that exists to help enrich and empower your life and the community. Syverson Strege's focus is to assist clients to be good stewards of their resources to pursue their passions. Join us as we capture stories that need to be heard.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for the This Story Needs to Be Heard interview series. My name is Lance Gunkel. I'm the Managing Director at Syverson Strege. Joining me is my colleague Adam Steen, the Director of Business Development. And today, Adam and I are excited to have Dr. Teri Wahlig joining us. Dr. Wahlig has a special connection to many families across the community due to her service with ChildServe in Johnston. That connection also reaches the family of one of our own at Syverson Strege, Adam's son Riker, and you'll hear a bit more about this later. Dr. Wahlig is the CEO of ChildServe after having served 7 years as their Chief Medical Director. She's the past board chair of the YMCA of Greater Des Moines and has served on many boards over the years. And in 2018, she was a business record Women of Influence Honoree. So Dr. Wahlig, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Lance. Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure.
Well, Teri, the healthcare industry is unique, and for the leaders in the industry, it requires many challenging decisions. Now, you were a practicing physician in the top of your field that is now, you're now in the top level of leadership in the industry. What specific events or moments led you to make that change?
You know, it's really interesting, Adam. I think life is a journey. I did spend, as you mentioned, the first 17 years of my professional career as a neonatologist in the neonatal intensive care unit at Mercy One here in Des Moines. Loved that experience. And during that time, I was on the board at ChildServe. So I grew to know and love ChildServe through board service. And then about, mid-career, I started to reevaluate where I was going on this journey. And the position for medical director came open at ChildServe. So I made the leap from clinical, hands-on practice to administrative work at ChildServe. And I really never looked back. What's so impactful, I believe, for me is that it's really life after the NICU for so many families. I have developed a much better understanding of what families face and experience caring for their children and young adults who may have been born premature or had other medical conditions for which they need ongoing services, such as what we do at ChildServe. So it's really deepened my appreciation for what families experience in ways that's sometimes hard to explain. But I was out to lunch a few years ago with a mom who I met in the NICU. Her son had been born premature at 24 weeks and had multiple complications. And now it was about 5-6 years after his graduation from the NICU. And I was so struck that while we're having lunch and she was sharing, some of the challenges they were facing, she received a phone call with an emergency that she needed to get up and run right then to help take care of him because he was having yet another medical emergency for which he needed immediate care. And it was just a really powerful, impactful moment for me when I had kind of the sudden awareness, almost a sense of sadness came over me that, wow, life is really challenging for families when they're faced with some of these conditions. And I just was not fully aware of that. It's interesting, I had a conversation with her a few months later, and I shared that with her, that I had almost this sense of sadness. And she said, life is still beautiful. We would not really have it any other way. We love our son, and it has made our life better. So again, so many ways to explain the journey, but it really is life after the NICU for families, and I've so appreciated walking that journey with them.
Yeah, what a wonderful outlook that that mother shared with you that kind of puts it in perspective for us.
Yeah. The two worlds really are connected. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. They seem very disparate, but they're quite connected.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, Teri, I noted that in your 2018 Women of Influence speech, you credited your parents, among others, as helping to guide and shape who you are. Uh, could you maybe identify for us a few things that your parents taught you that you think had an impact on who you are today?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think some life lessons aren't appreciated as kids. It's not until we get older we truly appreciate what our parents teach us. But so many life lessons, so many leadership lessons I learned growing up in this busy, chaotic family. I'm one of 8 kids. So you can just imagine what life was like in this busy house. But I learned so many great skills. I learned how to speak up. I learned how to negotiate. I learned how to share. I learned so much from my parents who were navigating this journey themselves. I think a couple things. One, from my mom, she really had that can-do attitude. She always figured out a way to get somebody to ballet lessons and to baseball practice and to soccer practice. And, I have to admit, she kind of sometimes forgot to pick us up at some of those things, but she always found a way. She made it possible. And I think that's a valuable life lesson. She also liked to push the boundaries a little bit. And one really fun story, if I may, kids want to have a dog. And I can't tell you how many times we advocated, I want a dog, we want a dog. And my parents pushed back on that quite a bit. But we were able to influence my mom to where she kind of wanted a dog too. So my dad was the holdout. And I'll never forget a day he was leaving for work. And he turned around and said, "You know what? It's either me or a dog." And he was off. And barely before the door shut, my mom turned to us and said, "Okay, kids, now go get your piggy banks." And then we were sitting around the kitchen table with our quarters and our nickels, and I think we cobbled together about $3. And we got in the family wagon and we got a dog. So my dad hung in there and grew to love the dog. But, my mom had that can-do attitude and also liked to push the boundaries. So again, valuable life lessons. And if I could share one more story, something I learned from my dad, who I think you might appreciate, Lance, a very analytical thinker. He is a CPA and, I didn't really know as a kid for sure what he did, but he took a briefcase and he left every morning and did some important work. But he has great organizational skills. And this came out in how he used to pack suitcases for 8 kids as my parents took us on family vacations every year. So God love them for taking 8 kids on family vacations. But you can imagine packing suitcases, quite a deal. So he would take all the furniture out of the family room and then take pieces of paper and create this grid on the floor. And on the x-axis, he put paper that represented each type of clothing, like shorts and shoes and swimsuits. And that was all on the x-axis. Then on the y-axis, he had a piece of paper for each kid, Patty, Joe, Terry. And then he would have us all bring our clothes and start to fill in this grid. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
He was teaching us how to build a spreadsheet. And I think it was a valuable lesson because I don't recall we ever forgot a piece of clothing on one of our vacations. There was that one vacation they forgot a kid. It was never perfect, but what great lessons I learned from my parents. And despite the chaos, very loving household. And I think maybe the underlying lesson is that it's just really important to love your kids. Just marinate them in love for about 16 years, and they're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I find myself when I'm talking to my kids or trying to teach them lessons, I find myself maybe reiterating what I heard as a kid, just that, trust me, you'll appreciate this one day. And so besides trying to convince them of how right we are, is there a way we can teach our kids that this will sink in? Or do we just need to trust that in their own way they're listening and absorbing?
Yeah, I think there has to be a lot of trust that they will remember these life lessons, because I do believe that to be true. You know, my mom had a punishment, I guess you could call it a punishment, for when we were fighting. And I have tapped into this as an adult. Maybe it didn't have the impact she wanted at the time, but whenever we were fighting, she inevitably would say to us, "Now you go give your sister a hug and tell her you love her," which was just like the death sentence when you're trying to have a good fight with your sibling. But it did stick. It did stick in that, you know, reaching out, making yourself vulnerable, not being afraid to give somebody a hug and say, "I love you," is probably the best life lesson that they taught. So I think we have to believe that they'll hear us and they'll remember, and some of those things really will stick.
Yeah.
It's sage advice. I just so happened to have gotten back from really being Casey's first vacation with the boys last week. And we did it was Casey's idea. She has all the good ideas, but she had the boys pack their own backpacks for the vacation. And by the time they were done, the zipper could barely close on their backpack. And then when they went to bed that night before we left, we looked what was in there. And I've never seen a more random assortment of things just stuffed in this bag, from goofy glasses to animals to pencils. I mean, you name it. They just had everything. So we may have to get them on that grid system sooner rather than later. But, this is kind of shifting gears. And as I think through how I want to ask this question, I'm going to try not to cry. I don't think I've cried on one of these interviews yet, but as you know, my son Riker has benefited from ChildServe for really almost 5 years now. And there was a moment, and I believe it was at the Chris Norton fundraising event at Prairie Meadows. And for those who don't know, Chris Norton was a football player, was paralyzed on the field, and has created an unbelievable organization designed to help people with spinal cord injuries and different things. They've raised a lot of money. And it was that night that Riker was going to be kind of a star of the show for the event. And I saw something very special in you. And you were dressed to the nines. It's a formal banquet with tons of other people dressed in suits and ties. And when we walked around a couple tables, you saw Riker, and you immediately got on the floor and began playing with him. And it was like no one else was around, and you were just there playing with them. And I told my wife, and she saw it all too. Like, here's this doctor, here's this CEO, this woman of influence, and your heart just completely overtook your position in your stature. And it just gives me chills, because I mean, it was amazing. And we just kind of sat back, and it was like, this is just a very special moment for us. And the question I have in relation to that is how can we model or teach others to let their hearts overtake their authority and overtake their positions in the community? How can we do that?
That's a great question. I remember that evening as well. We were playing race cars.
Yeah. Lightning McQueen.
I think working with kids perhaps gives me an edge, gives me an advantage, or maybe it's an excuse to tap into what we call at ChildServe believing in the spirit of a child. And I love that. I love believing in the spirit of a child. Sometimes we struggle to find the words to describe what is that spirit or that essence. And I would describe it in Riker on the floor playing with his race cars amidst all these adults walking around. I would describe it as the 4-year-old who's more interested in the box the toy comes in than the toy, because the box can become a rocket ship. And I believe when we tap into the spirit of a child, we build rocket ships. It's so pure, it's so innocent, it's so passionate, that it is within that we can create things that seem impossible. So I think Riker inspires me. I think kids inspire me. And I love nothing better than getting down on the floor and playing imagination with them, because they teach me. And I think it brings out the best in all of us when we really tap into that spirit, because that is, I believe, at the core of all of us. And it is what is true and profound. And it's within that we can do so many things that we didn't think we'd be able to do. So I think that's how kids allow me the privilege of doing that every day. I was walking in the hallways just this morning, and we all have our masks on, so it's hard to see expression and whatnot, but I was just smiling like crazy because there was this little guy who had to be picked up by his mom because he didn't want to leave therapy because he was having so much fun. So,
that's awesome.
that's where it's at.
Yeah.
The spirit of a child.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like I talked to a friend of mine named Will Keeps, who has got an organization downtown Des Moines, and we're talking one day, and he said, Adam, we don't need to think outside of the box. We need to create a new box. And it sounds like what you're saying, as far as the spirit of a child, if we focused on creating that new box, and just letting that flow out of us, that might sort of breed the spirit of a child. Would you kind of agree with that?
Absolutely. There are so many things that can separate us, yet there are so many ways we are alike and need each other, that we have to think about it differently. We have to approach it differently. And I think kids, again, have a lot to teach us there.
Yeah.
I think Will's spot on with that. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and that kind of, for me, dovetails a little bit into my next question. And you touched on it earlier, about the topic of love. And it seems that, to me, this is my own sort of personal opinion, that if we don't pay attention, we would say that the world is lacking in love. And really, from my perspective, I see love all around us, but maybe others just don't see it. Again, that's just kind of my opinion. But from that perspective, how do we better expose or bring out the power of love inside of people?
Yeah. One thing is, I think we have to make it a part of our vernacular. I think we have to make it okay to talk about it. There's this great business book I read recently, and I'm now having the whole executive team work through it together. It's called Love is Just Damn Good Business. And it's a business book, and it talks about how it's okay to bring that word in the business setting, or perhaps the family setting, or the school setting, or whatever setting. It might be okay to have that word be a part of our vernacular, and then unleash it. So I think recognizing it looks different in a lot of different situations, not being afraid of it, and then tapping into the power of it. Because I agree with you, Adam. I think there is a lot of love there. And sometimes, in my career, looking back as a doc in the neonatal intensive care unit, sometimes that day included life and death and all the ups and downs in between. And yet throughout, there was examples of great love, difficult, painful times. So it's going to look different in lots of different situations, but I think giving ourselves the permission to use the word, to tap into it, and that'll help us recognize it and draw the power from it.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's particularly powerful today, as we sit here during this interview, we're about close to 6 months deep into the COVID crisis. And I know we're all feeling some fatigue from how that's impacted our lives and the lives of the people that we love. And it's created this divisiveness that seems to be all around, and it's all anyone talks about. And what a good reminder that we need to shed ourselves from that line of thinking and focus on love, as you mentioned, but also maybe remembering that we should bring that spirit of a child to our daily activities. I think that might be beneficial.
Yeah, it certainly has been a challenging year, and there doesn't seem to be a ready end in sight. So I think compassion, some empathy, and love, so critical. In fact, it almost seems like it might be the only thing that can heal us right now without some magic medicine or magic vaccine. And we have that. We have that in our toolkit.
Yeah,
so,
I'll take both. I'll take compassion and a vaccine.
If only we could inoculate ourselves with compassion and love.
Yes.
I can think of a couple people right now I would inject, but anyway.
Yeah.
Well, Teri, we're about to wrap up here, but to close, we would appreciate it if you could leave us with a lasting message for everyone listening. What gives you hope or brings you inspiration today? What's the message that our community needs to hear?
I think it comes back to believing in the spirit of a child. It's Riker playing with cars in the midst of an adult party. It's the willingness to be creative, innovative, passionate. I think tapping into that because it is in all of us. So I think that's the overarching, maybe underlying message is let's believe in the spirit of a child.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Teri, Dr. Wahlig, thank you for sharing your message with us and spending time with us today. I know our listeners will be able to take this message and be inspired towards their own pursuits. So
thank you.
On behalf of my colleague, Adam, and the whole team at Syverson Strege, thank you for listening to the This Story Needs to Be Heard interview series. Be well.
Thank you for listening to This Story Needs to Be Heard. If you know of a story that needs to be heard or would like us to help you in your pursuits, please contact Adam Steen at asteen@onlyworkforyou.com.